Hello, health champions. Today, I want to talk about the signs of dementia and why it's crucial to recognize them early. Because, even though the body has an incredible capacity to recover and regenerate, dementia is one of those conditions that, once the early stages are over, is simply irreversible. Dementia, in general, refers to mental decline. It is a decrease in the ability to perform mental processes. Therefore, it is associated with memory problems, personality changes, and impaired reasoning. And that's why it's one of the most devastating diseases one can contract, because even if the person is technically still alive, even if the body is still there, the person we knew is no longer there. Dementia is a general term. It encompasses many different types of dementia. Thus, the most common form of dementia is Alzheimer's disease, which is associated with specific signs, such as amyloid plaques and what are called tau protein tangles. But all of this isn't really important. There are other types, such as Lewy body dementia, where protein aggregates are found, and then there is vascular dementia, which results from multiple silent strokes. And that's often the case with people who have strokes. And if I say it's not that important, it's because, regardless of the type, there's not much that can be done. It's more of an academic exercise in classification. We want to understand the very early signs, as well as the mechanisms that cause them, so we can detect TAU disease, but even better, so we can prevent it. I've watched videos on the subject, and it was a bit discouraging to see that most of the advice on diagnosis boils down to classification, to labeling the disease as dementia, rather than age-related decline or forgetfulness. And it's almost as if the main purpose of having a classification, of having this dementia label, is simply to give us greater tolerance, a better understanding of what these people endure and what becomes of them. It's like a child. You can't get too angry with a child because you know they're not mature. You know they don't have the cognitive capacity to handle things like we do. But what I really want to get across is the process. If we detect the TAU effects, then it's still reversible. And why is that? Why is it so difficult to reverse in the later stages? Because we need the brain to repair the brain. Brain function needs to be present to prevent further decline. So, once we have a certain amount of brain function, then we have the motivation to act, to exercise, to take action, to lead an active life, to make decisions about healthier eating, and so on. And then, this activation stimulates brain function, which fuels motivation, and so forth. But the reverse is also true. Once we lose some brain function, once that loss of brain function exceeds a certain threshold, we lose motivation, and therefore we lose activation, which leads to further decline in brain function, and so on. So once it's beyond a certain point, we simply don't have enough healthy, viable brain tissue. We don't have enough energy to change the mechanism, to modify the process. I'm going to explain the 7 stages of mental decline, and you'll then understand why these advanced cases are so difficult. Because once the brain is gone, it's gone. The first stage, for whatever reason, is when you're still functioning normally. I don't know why they call it stage 1 instead of stage 0, or before stage 1, but that's how they do it. Being normal is where you want to be. Stage 2 is a very slight decline, and that's where we're still on the green side of the spectrum. It's not quite dementia yet. It's just that you forget things from time to time. You might not immediately recall familiar words. We might not remember where things are as quickly as we used to, and that's perfectly normal. We all have good days and bad days, and it could simply be related to age. And the other thing to understand is that brain degeneration is a continuous process. We all have a little of it, but the trick is to make it progress so slowly that we can live our lives and reach the end of our existence with as much of that function preserved as possible. Stage 3 is the beginning of dementia. At that point, you are officially in the process of developing dementia. You're still at the beginning. It's still considered a decline to bequeath. But one of the things you might start to observe is the forgetting of names. You're talking to someone, they introduce you, you try to remember their name, but a minute later, you can't recall it. Your short-term memory is failing. Another sign could be forgetting what you just read. You watch a clip from a film or read a paragraph, and a minute later you've forgotten the content. At this point, you might see gains to be made to compensate. They realize they are aware that their short-term memory is declining. So they develop a strategy to map out their path, to note down things they know they need to remember, but that they will probably forget. And we all do this to some extent, because we use lists to stay organized, etc. But this is a bit more advanced. These people mark their path, as if with breadcrumbs. They know they'll find the notes to bring some order to their lives. But their ability to organize and accomplish tasks also deteriorates with planning, especially when things are complex or involve multiple steps. Now, they truly can't manage without having marked their path beforehand. The key point to understand here is that when individuals begin to compensate and develop a strategy, they still retain sufficient cognitive capacity, remain aware of the problem, and are motivated. At this stage, it is still possible to turn things around. By understanding how the brain works and its needs, it is possible to implement a strategy to truly reverse the trend. Stage 4 is still considered an early stage of dementia, but the moderate decline makes reversal increasingly difficult. While virtually impossible to reverse, actions can still be taken to slow the process. One example would be forgetting recent events, things that happen beyond simply reading a paragraph. You may have done something and now you don't remember it. Another common occurrence here is impaired calculation skills. Your ability to perform simple calculations is no longer as good. So, an example would be subtracting sevens. You start at 100 and subtract 7. So, 100 minus 7 is 93, 93 minus 7 is 86, and so on. Normally you should be able to do this, even if it's not instantaneous or as fast as someone else. But once you reach that point, you're simply no longer able to do it. And among the other things you lose, there may be the ability to pay bills, to manage your finances. Even when you concentrate, you can no longer understand. And tasks requiring more planning and management become increasingly difficult. So someone else needs to start taking over these tasks. Now, regarding these steps, it's important to understand that even though we primarily focus on the cognitive aspect on diagnosing mental abilities, this mental capacity is reflected in physiology. The physical tissue of neurology is declining, and this decline is progressive. And before we can observe a noticeable cognitive decline, there has already been a progression of physical decline. So we're talking about the cellular machinery, your neurons, which very gradually begin to decline in their ability to produce energy, in their ability to generate signals. This is the beginning of it all. And as this progresses, we might notice a decline in brain endurance, and we'll see what that means. And then, after observing these initial signs, we witness the beginning of degeneration, followed by these early signs, leading to progressive symptoms of dementia. Intercepting early degeneration allows us to reverse the process. By the time the first advanced symptoms appear, it is simply too late. Thus, before any signs of cognitive impairment appear, a decrease in brain endurance may be noticed, resulting in reduced tension or more pronounced mental fatigue. You may find it harder to concentrate for extended periods than before. You might experience a need for caffeine or another stimulant to cope. Or you might notice that, in another respect, you feel your brain function no longer provides the quality of life you were used to. You observe that there is a change. Another sign to watch for in the very early stages is changes in posture and movement. Your cognition is still present, but these signs indicate a decline in brain function, in the brain's physical ability to work. If you are sitting and notice twitching or trembling, it's a sign that the brain can no longer control these movements as well as before. If you notice that your handwriting is becoming smaller, and this isn't because you are naturally neat, but because you used to write a certain way and now your handwriting is changing, becoming more cramped, this is called micrographia. That's another sign. If you can no longer smell food as well, your sense of smell is a result of brain function, just like everything else, absolutely everything. So, if you can no longer smell food, it's very common. If the quality of your sleep deteriorates, brain function determines hormone production and the regulation of sleep cycles, as well as stress management, and so on. Another sign you might notice as the brain degenerates is a hunched posture. So posture is part of brain health. We begin our lives as babies. We begin in the fetal position. We are all curled up. And then, as the brain develops and progresses, and the frontal lobe learns to inhibit certain things, we adopt an upright posture. And then, as the brain begins to weaken, we curl up more and more, we hunch over, and we somehow revert to that childhood posture. Another sign that the brain isn't functioning as well is the loss of arm swing. When you walk, you might swing one arm more than the other, or your arms might hardly swing at all. But what you need to understand is that poor brain function causes these symptoms, but it also works the other way around. If you pay attention to your posture and arm swing, you're actually strengthening brain function. So, when should we start to worry about dementia? And when is it simply something that comes with age? With dementia, poor judgment is very common, but these individuals have chronically impaired judgment. They are incapable of sound judgment. It's normal to make bad choices from time to time as you get older, but once you think about it, you can reason things out. With dementia, you're often unable to manage a budget. However, I think everyone has forgotten to pay a bill at some point, and that's different. It's occasional. People with dementia often lose track of time, the day, the month, or even the season. They might start in the summer and say, "Oh, are we going to have snow today?" What would be normal is not knowing if it's Wednesday or Thursday, because they have a lot on their mind. We get distracted. But if we take the time to think, we can deduce it. And with dementia, people lose objects, but they are also unable to retrace their steps and understand where they are or what happened. It's normal to lose track of things from time to time, but you still have that basic awareness of what happened or where it might be. And with dementia, they also have trouble being coherent. So in a conversation or when trying to explain something, their reasoning is completely disjointed. There is no structure, no direction. And what would be normal is that sometimes we search for those words. We occasionally get lost, but with a little time, we can find our way back to our thoughts. And this has recently attracted media attention, where many people are suggesting that this might be what's happening with the leader of the free world. What do you want to do with Biden? I want to face him in a boxing ring. I should be so lucky. You know what I mean? But the kinds of things that come from Florida, things that come out of there. Robert Risley, Afghanistan. It's just you, I mean. Stage 5 is an intermediate stage, so you're sort of in the middle, or even beyond the middle of the spectrum. There's moderate to severe decline and brain damage. These people can't remember very basic things they've encountered, talked about, and known their whole lives. Suddenly, they no longer know their own address or phone number. Of course, their ability to realize and remember the time, day, or season deteriorates further, and they struggle to choose appropriate clothing. So, as in this image, they have difficulty matching things and are unable to select clothing appropriate for the season or weather. I don't want to go into the details of the causes, but I want to mention them very briefly here. For example, one can suffer from dementia, or one can have brain damage due to trauma or injury. But this is quite rare among all cases of dementia. In the vast majority of cases, it's brain disease and degeneration. It's a progressive decline in mental processes due to physical degeneration. And the first thing to understand in this context is the use it or lose it principle. Your muscles work in the same way. If you break your arm and put it in a cast, that muscle will atrophy because you're not using it. This is the most important component of brain degeneration. Yes, there are genetic predispositions and all that, but you have to understand the basic mechanism here. And what does the brain need? It needs fuel, which is what we eat, and then oxygen to burn that food. Fuel is what produces energy. But then, the second part, which people often overlook, is stimulation. And there's a lot of confusion about how to stimulate the brain. Most people think it's about playing bridge, doing crossword puzzles, and leading an interesting life. But in reality, over 90% of the stimulation of vital brain signals comes from movement. That's why I always recommend physical exercise. It's not the best way to combat insulin, but it's essential for keeping your brain active. Without stimulation, blood flow decreases, contributing to brain degeneration. Lack of use leads to decreased blood flow, affecting the brain. Neuroinflammation can also accelerate this degeneration linked to metabolic disease. and it's a topic I often discuss in my videos. And even though most people worry about their metabolism in relation to weight loss or diabetes, it's important to understand that Alzheimer's and dementia are often referred to as type 3 diabetes. This illustrates the strong link between the two. Insulin resistance and metabolic syndrome, or metabolic diseases, are a cause of neuroinflammation. Other contributing factors include toxins that inflame the body, as well as toxins from food and the gastrointestinal tract, environmental and dietary stressors. Stage 6 represents middle to advanced dementia. Now you're really approaching the critical point. These people are experiencing a severe decline, and one example of what's happening is that they can't even remember their spouse's name anymore. And that's where it becomes so devastating for a couple who have known each other their whole lives. And suddenly this person is just gone. She's there, and a piece of ours is there. It's as if they should be there, but they simply aren't. And these people need constant supervision. They are often placed in institutions at this stage because they tend to wander and get lost, and they have very little judgment when it comes to taking care of themselves. They also injure themselves very easily. Now they can no longer even perform the most basic tasks to take care of themselves. They are well cared for, and what's more, essentially nothing remains of their original personality. These are serious personality disorders. The 7th stage is advanced dementia. At that point, you're almost completely gone. It's a very severe decline. You talk to these people, you gesture, and there's absolutely no recognition of anything. They might utter random words, but there's simply no context or meaning. They have no awareness of themselves or their condition. And another thing that often happens at this stage is that they can no longer even swallow if you feed them. I hope you can truly understand that the things we usually associate with dementia are stages where it's too late to intervene. So when you're at this stage, when you have the ability to compensate, when you still have some motivation to develop strategies, that's when you want to notice and do something. From the earliest stages, even before cognitive decline begins, when there's just a slight decrease in brain endurance or posture, that's the time to act. If you like this video, you'll love this one. And if you really want to master health by understanding how the body actually works, subscribe, turn on the bell, and enable all notifications so you never miss a video that could save your life.